A couple of things I'm planning to cover tonight. I'm planning to cover the 2019 LSAT changes along with the digital LSAT. I'm also planning on talking about crafting your LSAT study schedule. So those are the things I'm planning to cover tonight for you all. If there are other things on your mind, other things you want me to cover, then please feel free to leave those in the chat and I'll get to them as soon as I possibly can. You can feel free to ask questions throughout this session. You can ask them later. Whenever you think of it, just feel free to interrupt. It won't throw me off. I'll continue to move along as planned. So it's just about 8 o'clock, and I don't want to punish those who arrived on time by waiting around for those who show up late. That's always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So what I'm planning for tonight, once again, is covering the 2019 LSAT changes. I know the March LSAT was this past weekend, of course, and so those of you who are still around looking at LSAT stuff, you're probably going for the June or July LSATs, or maybe you're even taking the LSAT in the fall. And this might be a kind of controversial opinion. I haven't heard other people voicing the same idea, but my thought is actually that you should take both the June and July LSATs if you're planning on taking either one, because it really is only a 6-week gap between the two. So if all you've got to do to stay fresh on the LSAT is study for another 5 or 6 weeks, maybe do another timed exam a week or so, just to stay fresh to avoid getting rusty, you could then take the July LSAT, which is, I believe, July 15th this year, mid-July. And if your score goes up a couple points, that's awesome. You apply with the higher score. On the flip side, if your score goes down or remains the same, it does not matter because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest. And so that's not a recent change, of course. That is not a 2019 LSAT change. That is actually a 2006 change. But for some reason, this old, outdated information kind of continues to circulate for people going forward, even nearly, 12, 13 years later. It's insane to me. And law school admission officers contribute to the problem. They say that they consider multiple LSATs or they average multiple LSATs. This is not true. There is not a single law school I can think of that actually does this. And I've talked with admission officers, and I think that they have this idea of holistic review. It sounds better to them, but that's not ultimately what they're doing. It is a numbers-driven process. So anyway, I'm really going to dive in now. 2019 LSAT changes. What is going on? I think the biggest change, first of all, is that there is a July LSAT. That's kind of new. For as long as I've been in the business, there have been 4 LSATs a year: February, June, then September or October, and then the December LSAT. But they're changing it up. They're adding 9, 10 test dates a year going forward. So that means there's about 1 LSAT every month or so, which leads us to what I was talking about earlier with that short gap between LSAT test dates. And because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores, retaking is more common than ever before. The average applicant's taking it at least 2 or 3 times, and probably far more than that. Even as many as 3, 4, 5, 6 times is not too many. Obviously, more than 5 or 6 times starts to look a little bit suspicious, maybe like a little bit questionable. And so I wouldn't recommend that. But even if you've got 2 or 3 takes under your belt, you've got 2 or 3 cancellations or scores on your record, not a big deal. So biggest change is more LSAT test dates means more LSAT retakes, means that you have reason to retake more often than ever before. LSAC has also paved the way to this by removing the limit that you take the LSAT only 3 times within any 2-year period. This used to be the limitation. It is no longer a limitation moving forward. So you can take the LSAT as many times as you want, and that's totally fine. Law schools don't have a restriction on it. Again, more than 6 looks a little bit questionable, but you can take it as many times as you want. And if you withdraw from the LSAT or you postpone your LSAT test date, law schools will never even know that you were registered. On the flip side, of course, a cancellation will display on your record. And so a lot of people are asking me about this July LSAT. There's many funny things going on with the July LSAT, but I'll speak to one of them right now. And the July LSAT, they will let you see your score before canceling. This sounds nice. It's kind of like going back to the SAT score choice idea where you don't have to reveal a bad score. You get to see it first before revealing it. This does not matter at all, in my opinion, of course, because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. So there's never really a reason to cancel your LSAT score unless something went horribly wrong on the exam. And I mean horribly wrong, like you didn't complete an entire section or something. But if you just have this vague sense that things went a little bit worse than they normally do, that's not a reason to cancel. So the July LSAT, letting you see your score before canceling, is not a big deal. I wouldn't give it more than a second or two of thought. I wouldn't consider it in the slightest. Now, what are the other changes going on this year? Of course, the biggest change is that we are transitioning to the digital LSAT. The June LSAT coming up in just about 2 months is your last opportunity to see the LSAT and take it in the paper and pencil format as it has always been administered. Going forward to the July LSAT, half of test takers will receive the digital format, half will receive the paper and pencil format. LSAT chooses for you, and you do not get any advance notice. So I don't know about you, but I would not want to be in that position. But maybe some of you are more tech savvy than I am and more comfortable with the ambiguity and dealing with the tablet if you get that, dealing with the paper if you get that. And like I said, I would honestly just recommend taking both June and July. So if you can, go for that, take paper in June, and then take either format in July. And then going forward to the fall, September, October, November, all of those exams will be on the digital format on the tablet, specifically a Microsoft Surface Go tablet, which last time I checked runs around $400, $450, or maybe even a little bit less than that on Amazon, depending. But you don't need to use that tablet specifically to practice if you want to practice like it's going to be on test day. You could instead use an iPad if you have that. You could use a Samsung Galaxy tablet if you have that. That's a bit more affordable, only around $230 or $250. And the benefit, of course, is being able to do the LSAT with the stylus as you will be on test day. If you have one of those really large smartphones like the Google Pixel, then maybe you could use that. If you can use the stylus with that, I honestly don't have a clue about that, but I would recommend trying to practice as it will be on test day. And if you have access to the PDFs, you could potentially use the PDFs on the screen and use the scrap paper on the side. Of course, it is a little bit of a different experience because the digital LSAT has some interactive features, which I'll get into in just a few minutes, but you can click around on your computer just the same as you would on a tablet. So it's kind of similar, not quite the same though. I think somebody asked some sort of question here. They raised their hand. I want to make sure I address that. I see something in the chat here about the writing sample. I could talk about that a bit. That is another change, of course, coming with the digital LSAT. So the writing sample starting with in June, actually. So anyone taking the LSAT going forward from today, you'll be doing the writing sample on the computer, and it won't be on test day. You'll be doing it later on your own time from your own device. They'll be monitoring you with a webcam and a microphone, and you'll hold up your government ID to prove that it's really you taking it. But you'll be doing that at home. Like I said, it is the 35-minute time limit, and you have up to 1 year from your LSAT administration to complete it in the digital format. Of course, on your computer, you'll be typing it out. And for that reason, because it'll be typed, I suspect that law schools will be looking at it a little bit more often than they used to. And by what they used to do, I mean, they barely looked at it at all. So going forward on the digital version, they'll be looking at it typed out. So maybe that's easier to read. Maybe it's easier for them to look at. But I really do think they're only looking at the writing sample in the event they have some sort of doubt about your English fluency, if perhaps you're a non-native speaker and they want to know that you really wrote your personal statement. Now, the question I saw here about the writing sample from Autumn was, if I already took the writing sample, the LSAT and the writing sample is different, do I still have to do the writing sample going forward? I believe the answer is yes, that starting in June, you will still have to do the writing sample, but only once going forward. So let's say you take it in June, you do the writing sample probably from home or wherever you bring your laptop to. You do it once, it's recorded, it's typed out. Beyond that, you don't have to do the writing sample again, at least for, I think, not 5 years, as long as your LSAT score is considered valid. So you can pay them $15 per additional writing sample if you want to do more writing samples and pay them to store it for you. But of course, I wouldn't see any point to that. You can obviously practice it on your own if you want to, but I really think it's not worth the time, even just doing it, practicing it, because it is pretty simple. You're given a dilemma between two options. You're forced to choose one of those. And so you argue in favor of one and you argue against the other. And you create a balanced, well-crafted argument, giving it your best effort, of course, but because it's not scored, it's not weighted nearly as heavily as the scored portions of the LSAT. So I wouldn't really devote too much attention to it. Now, I want to show you all what the writing sample is actually like in case you haven't, what the digital LSAT is like, excuse me, in case you haven't seen it before. So I'm going to pull that up here on the screen so you can take a look here. This is the digital LSAT familiarization tool. It's at familiar.lsac.org. So you can go there and check it out with me. I'm going to walk through just a little bit of what it looks like. This is, again, LSAC's website. They're showing us how to get used to the digital LSAT. On the right side of the screen here, they have section practice, so you can actually try out different LSAT questions. I'm not going to show those right now because of LSAT copyright stuff, but I will show some of these tutorials just to show you the features a little bit. So this is the practice section here. They're kind of just giving us a chance to look at the different features like dealing with answer choices, marking things or flagging them for later, navigating around it, and highlighting and underlining different LSAT questions. So if we go to this is presumably a logical reasoning question. You can see here that we can underline portions of the stimulus. We can underline the answer choice, or no, we can't. Yeah, we can actually, that's good. We can highlight things. We can erase what we highlight. We can erase what we underline. We can enlarge the text. We can make it really big if we want. We can make it really small if we want. So some cool stuff there. You can also deal with this brightness of it, I believe. I'm not sure if that's working here, but you're supposed to be able to do that at least. There's also this countdown timer. I think my video might be blocking that, but you can see here there's a 5-minute countdown timer here. You can select choices. You can flag choices. You can jump around to later questions. You see I'm now on question 5 because I clicked ahead to that. I can flag it, make a little flag there to come back to later. So there's some good and some bad here. I think that the biggest benefit, I think, is being able to flag questions and being able to instantly bubble questions so that you don't need to spend time slowly circling around that oval, filling it in with a pencil. And you can click around, obviously, with 5 questions. It's not too much effort, but if you're going through a full 25 or 27 question section, it's much faster to click back to where you want to go. And obviously being able to see what you've flagged at a glance is pretty cool. So I do like those things. What I don't like is this 5-minute countdown timer. For the full 35-minute section, you can remove the countdown timer if you don't want to deal with it or look at it. But once the 5-minute warning hits, you cannot remove that countdown timer. And I don't love that, obviously. I think that it's kind of stress-inducing, so I wouldn't want to be dealing with that. Maybe there's a way you could cover it up somehow. I don't know. But something to ask LSAC or the proctors. And if you ever have questions for LSAC, by the way, email them at lsacinfo@lsac.org, and they're obviously the ones best situated to answer any question at all about this. And email them now so they have time to get back to you. So I think that countdown thing is not ideal. But the biggest thing, honestly, that I don't love about the digital LSAT is that you cannot draw on the screen freehand the way you would on a piece of paper. You have the tablet, you have your scrap paper on the side, but you cannot draw on the question. You cannot underline the question manually the way you would on a piece of paper. You have to use their specific underlining tool or their specific highlighting tool. But if you have your stylus, like your digital LSAT pen, you can't draw sketches or underline or make little notes, like writing things out. You can't do that on the tablet. You have to get used to going back and forth between the tablet and the scrap paper. So this is a little taste of what you'll be dealing with. And so I'd recommend, obviously, practicing like it'll be game day. You do have, again, there is these LSAT sections you could play with. I believe it's exam 73 that they're using on the digital LSAT. So that's pretty cool. It's a recent exam that you have accessible to you in addition to the free June 2007 LSAT PDF, which is obviously a static PDF, not an interactive digital experience like this digital LSAT is. So anyway, that's kind of what the digital LSAT looks like. I got some questions here related to this, so I'll take those now. I got one question about the July LSAT about a fee waiver. I think that the fee waiver thing, if you have an LSAC fee waiver, they will automatically give you 2 free LSAT administrations as well as a copy of the LSAT Super Prep. I believe that's what they give you, and that's based on qualifying with your tax filings. And the other special thing about the digital LSAT, that your July LSAT that this person's asking about, is the score cancellation. And so yes, like I said, you do get to see your score before deciding whether to cancel. But once again, I don't really think that's a big deal. I don't really think that's an enormous benefit there. Now, any questions on the June or July LSATs as LSAC transitions to the digital format? I'll take a moment to pause and just deal with those questions before moving on to other things that I want to cover tonight. So, oh yes, thank you. Someone's clarifying that July detail. Thank you there. So the nice thing with the July LSAT, I should have clarified this, is that if you take the July LSAT and you decide to cancel, you do get a free retake moving forward. So if you want to take the July LSAT with a low stakes trial there, you can go ahead and take it again in September, October, November. I believe it's up to 1 year afterwards, maybe beyond that. You do get a free retake. And so the LSAT currently costs $190 to register for. So that, again, that's nearly $200. And if you want to save some money and get another LSAT trial, you get to save that there. But I do think this really is a drop in the bucket compared to the overall cost of law school and tuition and such. And so I would say take the LSAT whenever you feel ready. Take the LSAT whenever you want to, because law schools don't average it. They only take the highest. And so that's really the big benefit of this new change. There was really this old change going back to 2006. Now, if there's nothing else that people want to know about the digital LSAT, I'm going to move ahead and talk a bit about structuring your study schedules for the June and July LSAT and beyond. So the June LSAT, we've got 2 months remaining until then. And so I'm hoping that you're not starting off from scratch right now, because in my opinion, 2 months really isn't enough time to reach your fullest potential. I actually recommend closer to 5 or 6 months. So let's say if you took the March LSAT and you were studying for 2 months before that, then you're in a pretty good position timeline-wise going forward to June or July and beyond. But I'll talk a little bit first about just if you were starting cold now, and then I'll zoom out a bit to what happens if you're going for a retake or you're not starting from scratch. So an ideal 2-month LSAT study timeline would be that you spend a few weeks devoted to each particular LSAT section, focusing on games, then reasoning, then reading comp, if you're like most students, then timed individual sections, then full-length timed exams. So let's say starting cold, you do a couple of weeks of games focused exclusively, not exclusively on games, but primarily on games, mixing in a little bit of logical reasoning and reading comprehension. So focus on games, but still expose yourself a little bit to the other sections. Then, and within games, you work on games by type. So you do ordering games, then grouping games, then combination games. But specifically, you do the easiest ordering games, then moderate difficulty ordering games, then the hardest ordering games, then easy grouping, moderate grouping, difficult grouping, and so on. You don't want to just do individual sections randomly because it's scattered. The LSAT questions are scrambled by type. You're not dealing with them in a logical order that works for you to understand them. They're just publishing them as they were administered. So if you have a book of exams like 52 to 61 or 62 to 71 or 72 to 81, that's wonderful. But those are just released exams. So I've given categorizations on my website of LSAT questions by type. If you go to the free stuff tab and then you click, let's see if I can do this for you here just to show you exactly where to go on the site. So I'm going to share my screen a little bit. Hopefully there's nothing too embarrassing on there at the moment. I tried to clear this beforehand just to make sure. All right, so we've got the free stuff tab on my site. You click to LSAT question categorizations and analysis. You then click to logic games specifically, and you can see there I have games categorized by type, 19 to 38, 29 to 38. So you can see I've laid them out, sequencing, linear, advanced linear, grouping, splitting, matching, etc. I've got them for a variety of different exams, everything from 19 to 50-something and beyond. So I'm going to put the link here in the Zoom chat. If anyone's watching on Facebook, please join us over on Zoom because that's where I'm sharing all the goodies. But anyway, that's the categorizations there. And so I've also got for you LSAT study schedules where I lay out exactly what to do every single day over the course of your prep. I have free week-by-week plans, and then I also have premium day-by-day plans, but they're pretty affordable. They're only around $20 to $25 per exam, per schedule, excuse me. And so I've gone on my site here to the free stuff tab. So that was the free stuff tab at the top. Click on LSAT schedules. You then go to the schedules. I've got some comments from students there, as well as the weekly ones and the daily ones. And so the weekly ones, just to show you what that looks like, I have week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. But then if you want to get really hyper specific, I also have the day-by-day ones. And so I laid it out there in excruciating detail, exactly what to do every single day over the entire course of your prep. So you can then choose the schedule you want there. And so the general principle underlying these schedules, once again, is fairly simple. It's doing questions by type from easy to moderate to difficult within each category of game, then reasoning, then reading comp. So I'll tell you, read these pages in these LSAT textbook, then read these free articles on my site, then complete these exact specific LSAT practice problems from either exams 52 to 61 or 62 to 71. Then you can save the exams in the 70s and 80s for your full-length timed practice leading up to test day. So maybe you devote 2 weeks to games, 2 weeks to reasoning, 2 weeks to reading comp, then 2 weeks to full-length timed exams. That is, of course, a general overview. I wouldn't recommend waiting till the end to do the exams, and I wouldn't recommend waiting until the middle or the end to do reasoning or reading comp. So primarily focus on games at first, mix in a little bit of reasoning and reading comp, then do the same for the other sections. And as you finish your foundation on games, then you could do some timed game sections as you learn the basics of logical reasoning, and then bringing it forward, of course, to full-length exam, full-length timed sections to work on your pacing, then your endurance. So there are 3 phases of studying aside from just building the foundation. There's foundation first, then pacing, then endurance, along with detailed review. So the foundation is doing LSAT questions by type, untimed, giving yourself as much time as you need to learn the basics. Then you move ahead to individual timed sections to deal with pacing, because as you know, of course, there's a lot more to the LSAT than just doing questions by type or individual sections untimed. Timing is a huge constraint. There are plenty of students who will solve questions perfectly under untimed conditions. But then when it comes to pacing, things fall apart. So that's an additional factor of studying that you don't want to neglect. Then there's the endurance factor. Because LSAT exams are only 4 sections when they're released, a lot of times students will only do 4 section exams, but that's not enough. On test day, you'll be doing 5 sections because of that experimental section. So when you're studying towards the end of your prep, doing 5 section exams is extremely important to properly simulate test day conditions. So what you could do is, let's say you want to do exams 83, 84, 85, and 86 as full-length timed exams. You could then take exam 82, divide it into its 4 sections, and splice in each one of those 4 sections from 82 into exams 83, 84, 85, and 86 to give yourself the full 5-section exam experience. Then later, you could tally your results from exam 82 to see how you might have done had it been a full-length timed exam. So those are my general thoughts on structuring your studying overall. But I think the biggest factor that students neglect is the proper review of those exams. A lot of times students will say, I don't have enough time to review in detail all of the questions that I'm completing. And my response to that would be, well, do fewer questions so that you do have the time. The real value in taking timed sections or timed exams or even untimed work is in seeing exactly what your problem areas are so that you can focus on them going forward and learn from your mistakes. So rather than doing 20 exams, maybe do 10 exams, but review those 10 exams in excruciating detail. And when you review, I don't want you to review only the questions you get wrong. I want you to review everything that you possibly had any degree of trouble with, anything that you could have potentially solved more efficiently or more quickly. A lot of times students will, let's say, maybe get 20 questions wrong if they're getting a 160 or 25 wrong if they're getting a 160, and they review those 20 to 25. But there might have been another 10 questions that those students had difficulty with, were down to 2 on, but they got them right because they got lucky. But it very easily could have gone the other way the next time around. And so for that reason, I would say review those additional questions as well. So if you're getting a 160, maybe there are 30 or 35 questions worth reviewing. And if you review the way that I like to review, 35 questions is a lot. It could take you hours. It could take you multiple days to review them the way that I like to review them. And so take the time. And you might be asking, well, how do I recommend reviewing them? There's obviously looking at the answer key. There's looking at explanations. But the problem with those is that it's too easy to look at the answer key or the explanations and say to yourself, oh yeah, I get it now. It was so obvious. How could I have been so dumb? How could I have neglected that? And so hindsight's always 20/20, of course, especially when you have the answer right in front of you. So I would say mark off everything you possibly could have had trouble with. And then before scoring it, before telling yourself whether it was right or wrong, do it again under untimed conditions and see how you do. Maybe you got it right the second time. Maybe you got it right the first time and wrong the second time. No matter what, even if you got it wrong at least once, there is something to learn from that. There's something to be gained. And so I would say puzzle through it on your own first. And once you do know what the right answer was, ask yourself, what was tempting about the wrong answer choice that made you pick it or consider it, and what ultimately makes it wrong? And what was discouraging about the right answer choice that pushes you away from it, and what ultimately makes it correct? So you want to look for what are these traps of encouragement towards wrong answer choices, and what are the traps of discouragement away from the correct answer choices. And there are lots and lots of tricks and traps that you use. There are hundreds of them, too many to possibly list. And there are maybe 100 plus varieties of LSAT flaws out there. But then traps the test makers use, there are many, many more, because language, of course, has a lot of complexity to it, a lot of ambiguity to it. And you're not falling for all of these traps, or else you'd be getting every single question wrong and getting a 120. So presumably, if you're doing anywhere better than that, you need to figure out exactly which specific flaws or traps you're falling for and which ones you aren't falling for, so that you can focus on the ones you do have trouble with and avoid making those mistakes in the future. Because the exam, the LSAT, is not a test of memorization. It's not even a test of content. It's a test of pattern recognition. And so you want to be spotting those patterns now, learning them now, so that on test day, you're not reinventing the wheel by evaluating that particular method of reasoning or that particular trap in the answer choices on test day. It's kind of like you wouldn't want to learn how to multiply the first time you took a multiplication test. You want to practice multiplication, and you wouldn't want to determine how to take the contrapositive for the first time on test day. You'd want to do it on your own time at home first, many, many, many times, so that it becomes second nature. And same goes for things like chaining conditional statements together, or dealing with annoying words like unless, or even having a proper diagramming strategy and style for logic games, or a proper note-taking strategy for reading comprehension. Because, of course, there are nearly 100 released exams out there right now. And so there's no reason to walk into test day not knowing how to do something. It's the same stuff over and over and over. And it really is valuable to actually do the same LSAT questions multiple times. One thing I would budget time for in your study schedule is redoing LSAT problems, specifically logic games, because the patterns there are even more obvious than they are on the other sections. And so back when I was studying for the LSAT, and back when I first was coaching the LSAT in the early years of my career, the newest book of 10 exams at the time for quite a while was the exams in the 30s, specifically the Next 10 book containing exams 29 through 38. And for some strange reason, LSAT didn't release the 40s for a long time as a book of 10. So for many years, I was teaching the same exams in the 30s again and again and again. So I did the same logic games literally 30, 40, 50, 100 times. Really, I really did. And because that was what people were studying. Those were the newest exams. And so there were games where I didn't see a particular insight or inference until my 20th or 30th or even 50th time doing it. And obviously, I'm not saying that you need to do it 20 to 50 times, but even 10 times will reveal new insights to you about how these logic games are structured. And of course, the same is true of redoing reasoning and reading comp, although it's a little bit less apparent there. So I would say redoing games, if you have the PDFs, you can print out multiple copies. Otherwise, go to Kinko's and photocopy the games before you start writing on the exams themselves. And so, of course, the best study material for you will be these real LSAT prep tests. For those who don't know, they're published in books of 10 on Amazon. They're about $20 each, and they contain exams. Let's say the most recent ones you should focus on are, again, 52 to 61, 62 to 71, then 72 to 81. Then you can get the more recent ones individually from 83 to 86. I wouldn't necessarily focus on the older exams like the ones in the 40s and 30s and 20s if you're taking the LSAT in June or July, because you don't want to do older exams at the expense of the newer ones. So you want to budget that out. In my study schedules, I'll show you how to do that. I start off typically with 52 to 61 or 62 to 71, and then save the more recent ones for test day. And by the way, since retaking is more common than ever, one thing I will recommend for you is don't do all the ones in the 70s and 80s now. Actually save a handful of them to do in the event that you might want to retake in the future. Let's say you're going for June, maybe you want to retake in July, or either way, maybe you want to take it again in September just to see how you'll do. And so I would recommend save maybe only do the even numbered exams in the 70s and 80s and save the odd numbered ones for a potential retake. That's one strategy I found to be super useful for students because, again, retaking is more common than ever before, and people don't always think they'll be retaking, but obviously you never know what's going to happen in the future, so it's better to be prudent and cautious and save some of that new material. Now, I got a couple of new questions in the Zoom here, so I want to share that I want to address those here. Someone asked about canceling your score in July. Will law schools see that you canceled? They will always see a score cancellation on your record as opposed to a withdrawal or a postponement when they will not see that you canceled or were thinking of taking it. And so if you feel like July is not going to be right for you, I would recommend withdrawing beforehand, not taking it and canceling it if you're virtually certain that you know that you're going to cancel. So those are my thoughts on that. Someone asked about averaging multiple LSAT scores. Do Canadian law schools average multiple LSAT scores? I think they more recently made the switch from averaging them to only taking the highest. I'm not 100% sure on that. I would recommend contacting individual law schools in Canada about that, since it's not really my particular area of specialty there. Now, someone's asking also about which LSAT books I recommend. I think the most recommended ones, of course, are the actual official LSAT prep tests. Those are the best study material. Other than that, I don't really have a particular recommendation. As for other ones, any of the top rated LSAT books on Amazon is probably a good choice. You just want to make sure that they're using real LSAT questions and that those LSAT questions are recent. There are some strange LSAT books on there by companies that are called generic names like test prep books that don't use real LSAT questions, or they use really old ones. And so make sure that you can see on the cover that they're using real LSAT questions and that they are paying the licensing fees to LSAC and that they are using recent ones. One of these books, maybe Barron's or something like that, they're using a real LSAT exam, but it's from something like 1997 or 1991, exam number 17, I think. And so you definitely don't want to be studying from that when there's literally dozens of more recent exams to work on. They're just using exam 17 because it's cheaper to license. But that's obviously not in your best interest, so I wouldn't recommend using that book. Use something that is using more recent LSAT exams instead. And definitely don't use anything that involves fake LSAT questions. You'll typically see in the books that use fake LSAT questions that they contain mistakes. And oftentimes the Amazon reviews will talk a bit about that. So definitely be on the lookout for that sort of thing. Someone's asking about, with regard to study schedules, how should you structure your studying when you have a full-time job and you want to study like it's a full-time job? So great question. I love the ambition there and the enthusiasm to make it work for you, even if you're studying full-time. So for those who are studying for full-time, so for those who are working full-time or are in school full-time, obviously you can't put in 40 hours a week of LSAT stuff or else you're going to burn out. So I recommend instead treating the LSAT like a part-time job, maybe studying 10, 15, or at most 20 hours per week, and fit it in where you can. Maybe you do more on the weekends. Maybe you do more in the evenings. If let's say you're working full-time as a paralegal, talk to your boss, see if they won't make you work long hours, see if they'll let you leave at 5 or 6 p.m. instead, so you can fit in a few hours in the evening. If you're working a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 6, I'd say get to work maybe an hour early if you can, study in a conference room or in a coffee shop nearby, or even if you have no other options. I'd recommend getting out of the house because it'll put some distance between the time that you first woke up and the time that you're actually hitting the books. And obviously you're groggy when you first wake up. There's something called sleep inertia, and it lasts for a few hours. So I would recommend, if you can, carve out the time at work, wake up earlier than you're used to, and so you can walk into the office at 7:30 or 8 o'clock and knock out an hour or two before work starts. Then if you can, carve out a half hour or an hour during lunchtime. If you can't actually use books, maybe you read articles on my website, or maybe you listen to a podcast, or maybe you watch a YouTube video. And by the way, speaking of podcasts and fitting in the time, I do want to share with you a little bit of some podcast stuff I have going on. I've got 2 podcasts for those of you who may not be aware. I have the LSAT Unplugged podcast. That is just me, and I have interviews there. I have discussions. I have a former writer of actual LSAT questions where we discuss the LSAT there. I also did a LSAT prep radio interview on cheating and admission scandals. So those are on the podcast released in the past few days. As you can see, I'm releasing pretty much every single day except the weekends, but I may actually up it to the weekends as well, just because I have so much that I want to share with all of you. Again, it's LSAT Unplugged. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and pretty much everywhere else. Great for listening on the go. I also have the LSAT Pros podcast with my buddy Graham Blake. And so we're releasing more traditional weekly episodes that are longer, typically 45 minutes to an hour. That's also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and pretty much everywhere else. And so if you want to fit in the time, podcasts are a great way to do it because they're passive. You can listen while you're on the subway or in your car and absorb passively some additional LSAT knowledge. I also have a YouTube channel that you can pretty much, of course, watch or listen to anywhere. And so I'll share that with you as well. It's at youtube.com/LSAT blog. And so it's the LSAT Unplugged podcast. And so I have many, many videos there. I have LSAT Prep 101 videos. I have some popular ones. I have interviews, including with a former NYU Law School admissions dean. And I also have some LSAT coaching sessions I recently did with other students. I also have recordings of online live LSAT classes like this one. And then you can see my most recent uploads here. You can see I have some explanations as well on logic games and lots of other stuff too. So lots of stuff you can watch and listen to on the go, fitting in the time where you can. And so that's, again, before work, during lunch, after work, during your commute. And then in the evenings, let's say you want to study after work and you've got a couple hours, you get out at 6, you want to get home by 10 or 11. You could, again, find a conference room in your office or find a coffee shop nearby and bring the books, hit the books for another hour or two, maybe grab a quick dinner somewhere and have dinner as you study because you've got to fit in the time, right? Then you commute home, you relax, take it easy, watch Netflix, take a hot bath, whatever it is, but don't trust that you'll be able to fit in the time once you get home because it's too easy with all the temptations and family or friends or roommates and obviously the refrigerator, other distractions to get in the way of you actually getting back to the books. So while you're still in work mode, while you're still maybe dressed up, you could still be hitting the books there. If you're in college, treat it like a 6-credit class. Maybe block off some time on Fridays if you don't have Friday classes, or maybe once again on the weekend, but block out the time recurring in your schedule so that you have a 3-hour chunk there, a 4-hour chunk there, and take breaks, of course, but really do make it a priority and put it on your calendar, because if it's not on your calendar, then socializing or your day-to-day classwork will get in the way. And it's funny because you earn your undergraduate GPA over the course of 3, 4, 5 years maybe, but your LSAT score comes down to a single day, yet it weighs more heavily. So it's kind of irrational to treat the LSAT like it's only a 2 or 3 credit class, or not to block off the time, or even a 6 credit class really. The LSAT is really more like a 100 credit class given how it's weighed in the admission process. So investing 5 to 6 months or longer overall in your LSAT studies is worth it, and blocking off the time in your calendar is worth it. Now, I actually ended up investing an entire year in my LSAT studying. That was not my plan initially. I did plan to do it in 2 to 3 months, and I was in for a rude awakening when my scores stayed in the low 150s for a very long time. And it took me over the course of an entire year before I was able to reach a 175. And that involved doing every LSAT exam released up to that point. And there were something like 40 something exams at the time. So it was incredibly frustrating, and I didn't ever expect it would take quite so long. And I kind of took it as a blow to the ego that it did take that long for me. And there were lots of ups and downs along the way I won't get into right now. But ultimately, I think the point I want to make for you here is that if you're taking it in June or July and you've been studying for a while already, that's okay. Having a 4 to 5 month timeline is not too long. I find the people who do the best on this actually are able to study for 5 to 6 months or longer, and they're oftentimes in the position to be able to study close to full time. Maybe they have family supporting them, maybe they have friends supporting them, or they're at least devoting an entire summer if they're in college. And so if you could do that, great, maximize it. But if you can't, don't worry, just try to structure your life around the LSAT so that it always remains a priority and you're always putting in at least 10, 15 hours a week. Now, if you're in the position where you can study for the LSAT full time, you're very lucky, and I envy you and my students envy you as well, because most people are not quite that lucky. But if you can study full time, I would recommend wake up, take a shower, eat breakfast, work out, allow at least a gap of a few hours between your wake up time and when you start studying. So let's say you wake up at 7, you start at 9, or you wake up at 9, you start at 11. Put in about 3 hours or 3.5 hours of solid study time. Take a break for lunch, take a walk, come back, hit it for another 2.5, 3 hours, then sign off, and you're good for the day. This is sustainable. It is not burning out. It's not giving it every single waking hour. That's too much if you're studying full time, especially over the course of a few months. So really try to have some balance. You want your entire life to be structured well so that your mental capacity is sharp and you're ready to go. So that means eating well, exercising, sleeping at least 8 hours a night, ideally, and relaxation, mindfulness, meditation, something like that, and obviously socializing as well. But the LSAT really does require your all. And if any one of those things I listed is not correct, if you're not eating well, if you're not sleeping enough, it will show in your LSAT score. So definitely have some balance and use my schedules. I actually include off days in my day-by-day study plans because I really want you to take a break every now and then. And if you want to take a break while you're studying for those 2.5 or 3 or 3.5 hour chunks, there's a great technique called the Pomodoro Technique I highly recommend, where you study in cycles where maybe you study for a half hour at a time, but there's a 5-minute break towards the end. So study for 25 minutes, 5-minute break, back at it, repeat. You could even have a timer of some kind. There are apps for this as well, but factor in breaks because burnout is real. I see it all too often, especially among those type A gunner personalities going to law school, of course. And you don't want that to be you because then your score plummets and you don't know why. And it's not a conceptual thing. And it's not something that you actually can improve through studying more. It's by taking a break and achieving balance going forward. So anyway, I hope you all found that helpful. I see some other questions here I want to dive into here. Someone's asking about how many weeks of timed exams you should do before test day. So study schedule related, great question. I would say overall, you want the absolute number of timed exams to be about 10, at least 10 timed exams before test day. Ideally, this would be 1 exam per week, along with detailed review of that exam. Obviously, we have less time than that before the June LSAT, and I wouldn't want you to do timed exams before you learn the basics. So maybe you do 2 timed exams per week after you've invested at least a few weeks in learning the basics. And maybe you do 2 timed exams per week along with detailed review, or maybe you only do 1 timed exam per week along with detailed review. If you have other obligations, obviously 2 timed exams per week along with other studying and work or school, it's just too much. So give yourself a break. 1 exam per week could be enough. So if that requires going for July or September, maybe you want to retake it then also. But I wouldn't try to do 3 a week or anything like that. It would lead to burnout, and I definitely want you to avoid that. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about this live online LSAT class I have starting now, actually. This is actually the first session of that class, and I wanted to give you a taste of what it's like to work with me. I'm going to show you a little bit of what this class involves, just in terms of how I've structured it over the course of the next 10 weeks here. So this is the page on my live online LSAT Masterclass. It's going to be a small group. I'm going to limit it to no more than 10 students going forward. And so I have more than that here right now, but we're going to be more interactive with just the 10 of us. I'll get to all your questions personally, and I'll even bring you into the spotlight if you'd like to ask your questions live on camera if you want, again, just in that small, intimate environment. Now, this first class, week 1, I oriented it around 2019 LSAT Changes, the digital LSAT, and crafting your LSAT study schedule, and I'm happy to take more questions on that if there's anything I missed. Going forward, next Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, I'll be doing another class. That'll focus on LSAT logic games specifically, including common mistakes and how to avoid them. I'll be walking through real examples from each major type of logic game, ordering, grouping, combination, and so on. Week 3, which is 2 weeks from now, April 15th, I'll be covering LSAT logical reasoning. I'll give you some speed strategy and pacing tips, along with how to avoid getting bogged down on particular LSAT questions. For week 4, reading comprehension on the 22nd, I'll be going over proper note-taking strategy and approach, as well as pacing. how to allocate your time between the passage and the questions and how to take notes, if any. Going forward, week 5 on April 29th, I'll be going into how to take full-length timed LSAT practice tests along with detailed review, and we'll be reviewing some actual LSAT problems there as well to give you a taste of how to review. Then for the following 3 weeks, week 6, week 7, and week 8 in May, we'll be going over real recent LSAT prep test questions, discussing them together, along with analyzing tempting wrong answers, discouraging right answers, as well as the stimulus or method of reasoning or question stem or anything else at all that's giving you trouble. I'll be taking your specific LSAT questions as the basis for what we cover. So we will be co-creating this syllabus together, this class together, based on your particular areas of strength and weakness. Now, week 9, the final week before the LSAT, I'll be going over final week LSAT prep, getting into the right mindset, avoiding test anxiety and stress, avoiding burnout, and I'll be taking, of course, any last-minute questions you have, and I'll be going over what to do in the lead up to the exam day itself. But I don't want to leave off there because this LSAT, of course, continues on. You may be retaking, and of course, the day of the exam, June 3rd, if you're taking it in June, you're going to want to know what happened that day. You're going to want to do a post-game analysis of your performance, and you're going to want to know what to do differently next time around if you are considering a retake. So for that reason, I'm not ending the course the week before the LSAT like so many do. I'm actually going to meet with you the night of the June LSAT, if you're taking it then, to go over what happened and why, and how to retool going forward if you need to. And even if you don't, because like I said, there is a massive reason to retake in July, even if you feel like June went well. And that's because, like I said, law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest. So for that reason, even if June went fantastic, if you could do a timed exam a week for the next 6 weeks after that, that's only an investment of about 20 hours overall, plus a bit of review if you want to, and you can, of course. But it's not that much marginal effort, considering that the LSAT is more important than your GPA. So I think that's worth investing another 20 or 40 hours if it could get you even just a single point or two more on the LSAT. Believe it or not, that single point or two more could make a massive difference in getting into a better law school or getting more scholarship money. So the ROI on that is enormous. I highly recommend it. And so that's why I'm going to be sticking with you beyond just the week before. I will meet with you the night of the June LSAT if you're taking it then. And if not, of course, we'll go over what to do going forward to July. So this is, again, the page on the full live online LSAT Masterclass. That's what I'm sharing with you there. Again, I'm limiting it to only 10 students, and I'm closing the doors on the course this Friday at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. I'm going to open this up now to a general Q&A, and I will be taking further questions. I already have some here that I'll talk about now. Some of them are admissions related. Someone asked if I tutor. I don't tutor. I wouldn't say that what I do is tutoring. I consider it more like coaching, because I'm not just walking you through LSAT problems. I'm actually seeing the way that you think about the questions and kind of reorienting the way I explain them around that. And so there's a bit of a difference there. I do work one-on-one with students, and I actually recently did some live LSAT coaching sessions that I recorded, and they're on my YouTube channel if you want to see exactly how I work with students. Most recently, over the past week, I published a couple of coaching sessions with students, and so you can see what my work is like there one-on-one with folks. There's a page on my site as well where I walk through what my coaching involves. It's the Work With Me tab at the top of my site, sharing the link there as well. Getting back to your other questions, let's see. Someone's asking on admissions. I have a 3.9 GPA, majored in music composition. Will having majored in music composition affect my chances of getting into a top law school? Great question. So 3.9 GPA is an excellent GPA. Of course, law school admissions folks won't really know what grade inflation exists in music composition, if any. It's not necessarily on a curve the way that STEM or engineering type stuff is. So they will consider that. But at the same time, your GPA is your GPA. Your LSAC calculated GPA is your LSAC calculated GPA. And that's what gets factored into what is called the Law School Admissions Index. So overall, I hate to say it, but there is incentive to major in something easier and take classes which get you easy A's. That's what goes into law school admissions. It may not be right, it may not be fair, because obviously there are some majors that are more rigorous than others, But you can honestly major in anything and go to law school. And ultimately, if you've got a high GPA and you've got a high LSAT, you can pretty much write your own ticket. A 3.9 GPA with a 165 or 170 plus LSAT will open a lot of doors, including to the top 14. Got some other questions here I will get into as well. Let's see what else we got here. Someone's asking about GPA Addenda. So Addenda for, let's say you have a low GPA, that is obviously not desirable, but you can work with it. You can write a short, concise, matter-of-fact addenda explaining why your GPA was low and presumably why it won't be an issue in the future going to law school. So let's say you had a family issue going on, or you had depression or something else, whatever it may be, that's okay. Write a short addendum explaining it, maybe a couple hundred words at most, not blaming other people, not making excuses, but just stating very matter-of-factly, here's why my GPA was lower than it otherwise would have been. And hopefully you can demonstrate an upward trend going forward. Let's say your GPA was low for freshman or sophomore year, but you raised it junior, senior year, then you can talk about that and the upward trend is great. If not though, make the best of it. And you can't control your GPA at this point, but you can control your LSAT score. And so I'd say ultimately your GPA is what it is. Write the addendum if you can, if you want to, but ultimately nothing will speak to it like just getting a higher LSAT score going forward. So that's really where I would recommend focusing. Someone's asking, how do I register for the course? Great question. I will once again share that page with you where I walk through what the course is and why. And I'll share the link in the chat again. It's the live online LSAT Masterclass. And you go on that page, you scroll down. I have the syllabus week 1 to week 10 here. And then I have click here to reserve your spot in the live online LSAT Masterclass. And so, yeah, I'm closing the doors on it this Friday at 11:59 p.m. Pacific. So it's at the very end of the week, just before we hit Saturday. And I would love to see you there. Someone asked about the podcast I suggested earlier. So those are 2 podcasts that I host. They're with my buddy, Graham Blake. And let's see here if I can get back to that. So there's the LSAT Unplugged podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and everywhere else. And that's with me personally. Then there's the LSAT Pros podcast with my buddy Graham Blake. We release weekly there, as you can see. The one LSAT Unplugged with me, that's pretty much every single day. I kind of have gone overboard with it, but it's great to listen to on the go or passively, or if you're at work and you have some downtime, you can listen on your phone. And yeah, it's short episodes, long episodes, and ranging anywhere from 1 minute to an hour long. LSAT Pros is typically 45 minutes to an hour, and we're covering every aspect of LSAT and law school admissions. On my podcast, LSAT Unplugged, I have a lot of discussions and interviews with other folks. I had a radio interview recently that was pretty cool, live on radio in San Diego. I recently interviewed a former writer of actual LSAT questions. And so it's funny the people you meet in this business, but he's a lot of fun, shared some great in-depth insights that you don't really hear anywhere else. So definitely check those out. Let's see other questions here. I have a 3.4 GPA in poli-sci, and then how would that play out? I have a lot of work experience. Will that help too? Great question. So a 3.4 GPA obviously isn't as high as it could be, but it's not terrible. But the fact that you have 10 years of work experience in law in particular, that's awesome. So the work experience will do 2 things. It shows that you're serious, shows that you're mature, and also that it puts some distance between your undergraduate GPA and now. So they're going to say that, well, maybe this person was young, maybe they were immature, maybe they didn't have the work ethic, or they had something else going on. That likely is not the case 10 years later. So what time does, if you have a delay between undergrad and law school, is that it allows you to spend more time in the workforce, gain that experience, lengthen your resume. So it decreases the percentage of your application chances that are devoted to the GPA, and instead increases the work experience part of the pie. And then, of course, the LSAT is, as always, the biggest factor. Someone's asking, what GPA would be low enough to warrant writing an addendum? Great question. I don't have a hard and fast answer on that. I think that anything 3.5 and above, definitely no addendum warranted. Maybe a 3.3, not warranted either. I think the real question is, what would you say in an addendum? If you have a valid, legit reason like a family crisis or depression or a drug addiction or a criminal issue, whatever it may be, obviously that warrants writing something. If it's just, you know what, freshman year I was immature and I partied too much, or I took classes that were too hard for me, I don't really think that's worth it. You don't need to call attention to it if there's nothing super serious about it. I think honestly that a lot of folks have low GPAs in college because they socialize too much, and that if you don't have anything serious and honest to say about it, I wouldn't bother. Someone asked about taking a gap year between undergrad and law school. I think that's a great idea. I think that honestly, here in the US, not enough people take a gap year first. I think that a gap year has so much to offer. I wish I had taken one after undergrad before just kind of jumping right into this LSAT stuff. And I think that, yeah, life is short. If you're not 100% sure that law school is for you, definitely take a gap year, see the world, get some work experience, then come back and decide if you want to do it. But obviously, you can take the LSAT now anyway. The score is good for 5 years. So if this is your time in life where you have the most ability to focus on the LSAT and master it, then do it now. You got a 5-year runway before deciding whether to go forward and actually apply or not. So I would take time before applying, but not necessarily before LSAT studying. I think there's a benefit to studying for the LSAT while you're still in academic mode. So if you're a junior in college or a senior in college, I would say definitely get it out of the way now. Take it now while you're in study mode. It gets a lot harder once you're working long hours, maybe as a paralegal or you have a family. Then obviously those competing obligations can kind of take a toll. So I would say definitely do it now if you can. Someone's asking, have they released fall exam dates yet? They have. There's September, October, and November. There's no LSAT in December. Then there is another one in January. Then the follow-up is, if I'm retaking the exam in June, when would be the best to retake? I think July is honestly, because the gap between them is so short. You could take the LSAT in June 3rd, then only 5.5, 6 weeks later, take it mid-July, July 15th. So I think if you want to shorten your study timeline and take it while you're still fresh, do it again in July. The benefit of going for September is that you have more time, of course. You have an additional 3 months. But I'd say there's no reason not to take it in July as well, since it is closer to when you're taking it in June if you are taking it in June. Let's see, got another one here. What's a good schedule for someone who works full-time? Just took March, studied hard, didn't do as well as I could have. Kind of covered this already. Just to quickly recap, block off the time and fit it in where you can. Carve out 10, 15, 20 hours a week. That's really the best way to maximize your time and maximize your potential here. Got another question here about admissions side of things. Will having a master's, being a professor, and 9 years working in a nonprofit hold any weight? It absolutely will. I think that being a professor is honestly a huge credibility indicator when it comes to academics. So that'll help. I think the master's is nice. It's a plus, but not really necessary. I think that honestly, again, like I said, having some work experience is huge. It's great. It shows maturity. I think law schools do like to see that if possible. And it puts some distance between your undergraduate GPA and the present if your GPA wasn't what you would have wanted it to be. But again, take the LSAT when you can, apply when you can, when you're ready. That's ultimately what I would say on that. I don't think there's a clear answer on this, but you are where you are, apply where you are. I've got to wrap this up soon, so I'm going to take one more question, then sign off if there's anything else. Haven't decided on going to law school full-time or part-time. What are your views? Is it possible to get accepted part-time, then change it to full-time after 1L or 2L? Great question. I'd say it is easier to get in part-time than full-time. A lot of schools will have lower standards for admissions with the medians for LSAT score and GPA if you are going part-time. And then the nice thing is you still get to apply and take it with and still get the same diploma in the end, and no one will ever know you got in with lower numbers or got in more easily. So that's great. And of course, if it fits your lifestyle, if you're working full-time or you have a family obligation, that's obviously easier, even if it does take a bit longer. The downside, though, is that it really is hard to balance being in law school and doing other things like working. And so if you have to, no matter what, so be it. But I would see about trying to go to law school with significant scholarship money or going on a full ride to allow you the freedom to go full-time if you can. And obviously, the way you do that is by getting the best LSAT score possible. So that's what I'll say on that. Anyway, folks, this has been a lot of fun. I do kind of have to wrap up now, but it's been a pleasure connecting with you all. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all. I would love to hear from you, and I hope to see you in the course over the next 10 weeks. I think it'll be a lot of fun hanging out with you all each Monday at 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern, like this over Zoom. Small group of us, just 5-10 folks going through LSAT problems together, going over the basics. You go to that link. I'm not publicizing this live on the site. It's just for you guys. Live online LSAT Masterclass. And basically, there's the syllabus over the next 10 weeks, every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And in the meantime, as always, I'll wish you all the best and take care.